Hey, Mikey, I got a joke for you. You're going to love this one. Ready?
Ready.
I once considered a career as a historian, but then I realized there was no future in it.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Robin, I hate to break it to you.
My career in stand-up is over.
Well, among other things. No, I'm kidding. No, listen, it's funny if you know Mr. Robin, because he is quite the historian himself. So, but as far as making any money at it, I guess that's part of that.
So I got another one here. We'll try this one. General Custer drove his army all the way across Nebraska. At one point, he came to a big hill. He sent a scout up there to look around and tell him what he could see. The scout came back and said, "Well, sir, I have some good news and some bad news." Custer said, "Well, tell me the bad news." "Sir, we are about to be slaughtered by 6,000 Indians." Custer blurted, "Well, what can be the good news?" The scout replied, "Hey, at least we don't have to go back through Nebraska."
If there's anybody listening from Nebraska, do you want me to punch Mr. Robin?
Hey there, everybody. It is I, your all-around clever co-host and certified fool, Mr. Robin. We're coming to you digitally from Studio B here at the compound with episode 12 of Mr. Robin's Hood podcast. I'm joined, as always, by podcasting genius, my favorite collaborator and bestie, Mikhail Robinson, known throughout the podcasting uni as Mikey on the mic. Say hi to our vast audience of listeners, Mikey.
Well, hello there, vast audience of listeners.
We're also joined by Cousin Fred, who is back in the booth with his current flame, Magdalene. Today's episode features our honored guest, Mr. Bob Rea. Bob is a historian, history writer, cattleman, and subject matter expert on historic Fort Supply here in northwest Oklahoma. Bob is joining us to discuss the past, present, and future of the historic fort, which I personally consider the single most important former military post in Oklahoma, and by extension, the United States. In an episode we're calling, and our guest is yucking it up, In Search of the Truth About Custer's.
It worked.
Okay. In Search of the Truth About George Custer's Bowel Habits. Let's give a warm Mr. Robin's podcast welcome to Bob Rea. All right, enough of that.
Well, and I might add that among all of these things that Mr. Robin said Bob is, he also has a hell of a personality. This guy, he's yucking it up over here already about that. And he has a great sense of humor. So this is going to be fun. I cannot wait.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just going to be dull history stuff.
Thank you.
Right? Yeah, right?
Dull history stuff.
No, it's not that.
That's what us longtime historians like to hear.
I don't think that. I'm just saying, if people see this and think that's what's about to happen, they're going to be sorely misinformed, misunderstood, or I don't know.
Wholly misinformed. That's
yeah. This is going to be way more than just, your general, no pun intended, talk about history. All right.
Right.
So, hi, Mr. Rea.
Why don't you start, just kind of give us a little bit of your background, because I know you've done all sorts of things all over western Oklahoma.
Well, let's see.
He doesn't even know where to start.
How far back do we need to go?
Well, I'm particularly interested. I know you had a lot to do with the excavations down near the site of the so-called Battle of Washita, which we all know was actually a massacre.
Okay. It was 1992, and I had just started to work for the Historical Society. And since I was the closest person to Cheyenne, Oklahoma, being in Fort Supply, they decided I was the perfect person to get the ball rolling on the history, the study, and the archaeology, the prep for the archaeology projects. And so I went down there knowing absolutely nothing. But since then, I've educated myself quite a bit on the subject. We had 3 seasons of field survey, which means that we had metal detectorists and some historians and some Cheyenne Arapaho to kind of goad us along. And our primary purpose in that was to make sure we found the exact or the close proximity to the event, because there were several theories going around that maybe where we were looking was the wrong place, even though it was pretty safe in my mind that we were in the right place. I had found a surveyor's map from 1873 at the courthouse, and they were just doing the rectangular survey in western Oklahoma, and the surveyor noted that this X on his map, survey map, was where General Custer, with an A and not an E, had fought the Indians, I suppose. And so we established that we were in the right locale, mainly because we found residue of battle, because there were shell casings where we expected to find them. And there were other indications that we kind of developed later on. It was interesting because normally when you do archaeology, you have an idea of where you're going to dig or where to look. The problem at Washita was that it's in the floodplain of the Washita River, which is notably one of the worst places in Oklahoma to flood. Most of the early 1930s impoundments for water collection to keep the Washita from flooding was in that particular area. We had a geomorphologist who dug a trench with a backhoe trying to locate the remnants of the village in the bottom. And that water had roiled that soil up so much that there were things that were older that he was finding with things that were newer underneath them. So It just rolled down through there. The only metal detector hit in the whole field was a Budweiser beer can at 3 feet. We had to go up on the upper terraces to find evidence of the battle.
Huh. That's interesting, Bob. So that being your first roll with that, did you find that the other things as far as archaeological digs that you were involved in or have helped with were much easier to do? You're like, that one I wasn't prepared for, but now I am.
If you find a site where a building was probably it, then it's not too hard to dig. And I've spent enough time in 3x3 squares to know that archaeology I prefer battlefield archaeology because you can use a metal detector and go across. We worked Honey Springs, which was the largest Civil War battlefield in Oklahoma, by Shakota, and then we worked. And all of this was in conjunction usually with the National Park Service.
Okay.
And we did Pea Ridge and the other one in Missouri, Cabin Creek. We also did work at Sand Creek in southeastern Colorado.
So was this all kind of in the 90s or some of this?
It's strung out from the early mid-90s on to, I retired in 2014.
2014, so into the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
So this was all OHS?
Well, this was
at the overview, or?
Yeah, it was our surveys were done with OHS and the National Park Service, mainly because my supervisor was good friends with probably the best battlefield archaeologist in the country. And so we just used their help to go along with these things. Now, at Honey Springs, it was pretty clear cut where the battle was. We were all finding all kinds of items. from the battle, and the battle was like 3 miles long. So.
Right. So is this the first time that they looked there for that specific battle? It strikes me interesting if that is the case, that it's taken till the 90s to mid 2000s for people to go out and look. Surely other people were looking before, but
well, the other people that were looking were the ones that were the relic hunters. That, people come in or as the archaeologists say, looters.
Oh, looters. Yeah, I could see them viewing it that way.
Bad frame of
I
mind.
think I've been a looter before. Hate to admit that.
It was really, you have to find people that are interested in finding a particular place.
Sure.
Thing.
Yeah, because it takes a lot of resources.
And that was that's why we picked battlefields, was because my supervisor had experience with it. And,
okay, I see.
The other archaeologist with the Park Service was Doug Scott. So Doug Scott is the man who is a forensic scientist, and he can actually track across a battlefield movements of a particular weapon, because they all have the same. They all have a different signature,
right?
In the firing pin or whatever. He's done that to Little Bighorn, and actually, we did a little survey, 2-man survey up at west of Laverne at a battle site and I found a case that was not common to the cavalry at the time.
Right.
And so I sent it to Doug Scott, and he said, well, you know what? This particular cartridge case that you found is identical to the one that we picked up at the Washita. This was September 68 to November 68.
Wow.
So and it was a civilian type of weapon. So
right.
It had been one of the scouts.
Right.
That was one of the interesting, things to me, is that how you could do that. But
how you could figure that out.
He spent a lot of time over a microscope.
Wow. Well, that's really interesting. And for him, I'm sure that's the little details that he's looking at in each one of those is very interesting to him, which is why he's probably so good at what he does. I could understand it, although I don't know that I could do that all day. Look through a microscope.
No,
what? No, Bob knows me all the time. He's like, no, you couldn't do that, girl.
We just find them and turn them over to him.
Yeah.
It's
and then at what point did you step up and become the I guess it was site manager out at historic Fort Supply?
Well, at Fort Supply, I was hired in December of 91 and went to work, in January of 92. So I spent about 22 years up there, give or take. And
how did you stumble upon getting that job?
Well, our newest board member, Rita.
Yeah.
She called me one day and said, hey, you're looking for a job? I said, yeah, I've been digging ditches. Which always thrilled my mother that I had a college education. I was running a shovel.
Right.
So I applied, and of course, I was the only person that applied.
Oh, really?
I got the job.
Well, you know what? I feel like if there was other people that applied, you probably would have still got it. But
well, you see, the kicker was as
nobody
soon as they found out that this was going to be the only historic site within the grounds, or was actually surrounded by a correctional institution, the rest of them dropped out.
Oh, really?
But I was hungry, so.
Well, and what I know of you, Bob, what's that saying?
I don't
even know. I don't even know the saying. He's like, don't say any sayings right now. All I'm saying is that you're not fazed by that kind of stuff. I feel like you're a kind of person that's like, rolls by.
Well, they gave me a job, and
the beat of your own drum, but also it's like rolls off the cuff, like that kind of stuff. Whatever.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, heck. Can I even say what his kid does? I mean, somebody who has a kid that grows up and does that. I'm not going to say it.
You can't do that.
But what Bob's son does, he's not scared of no correctional place. That's all I'm saying.
I never was really.
Yeah, that's like that didn't bother you. That's what I'm saying. Like even though you were hungry, like even if you weren't hungry, I feel like you still would have been like,
needed a retirement,
whatever.
You
wanted the pension.
Ups and downs in the cattle business that you have to endure. So
well, it's kind of interesting to hear Bob talk about some of his time out there when the historic site was actually surrounded by, a minimum security.
Well, he worked directly with those people too.
And It's kind of interesting to hear your talks about how you employed the prisoners to do the really hard labor out there. You mentioned once you had them climbing or crawling underneath the commanding officer's quarters.
Well, the commanding officer's quarters was a structure that was built as a frame structure, one of the very first that was built at Fort Supply. And for some reason, it was built on cedar pilings instead of a real foundation. And when I first walked in the building years ago, it was kind of like walking. Maybe if you could walk on water, it's like you were walking in the ocean because it had swales and low spots. And we got under there and found out that, of course, some of the cedar pilings were deteriorating. So
Right.
I had a crew get under there, and they would tunnel under, and I bought some jacks, and they jacked it up, and we put cement blocks under it, and we stabilized that part of it. And one day the warden walked by. He was just walking around the facility, and I was standing there looking under the house. He says, "What are you doing?" About that time, one of the inmates brought a bucket of dirt out. I said, "Well, I'm just teaching these boys how to dig out." He didn't think it was really funny.
See, I told you he had a sense of humor. See, this is it at its finest.
You've got to sometimes when you're dealing with,
Exactly what I'm saying.
To their credit, we incarcerate some very talented people in Oklahoma.
Right. And
in the trades, that is.
Yeah. And I was going to say that because I feel like we've had that conversation that some people just make really dumb decisions and choices, but there are very skilled people that are in some of the prisons and in all of the country, really. I bet he knew some of the ones. I bet you put some of the ones to work that were sending me fan mail back in the day. Yeah. So when I worked at the radio station, they would send me letters because they could listen to the radio for some point. I don't know exactly, but I'm pretty sure Friday nights was one time they could listen. And it was the Friday Night Free for All, and it was a call-in show. Well, at the beginning of this, they couldn't call in because it would cost. They kind of saw a way around that, but that's another story. But they would send me letters, requesting songs and telling me those kinds of things, and they would mail it to the radio station. So I'm like, I bet some of those guys did some work with Bob.
Always possible.
Yeah.
Some of the
I'll have to ask him later off the podcast.
A lot of the people that worked for me were chosen to work for me by the warden or somebody else. They knew that, they were going to do the job and they weren't going to get me in any trouble.
Okay.
I had to fire a few people, but not too many. I mean, it's not hard to fire an inmate.
Yeah, well, I'm sure not. Well, and some of these they were amazing artists. They would draw me pictures and stuff, so I could see them being good tradesmen. I feel like sometimes there's crossover in that.
Yeah. The thing about using that type of labor for what I was doing was I was the only employee.
Right.
And so
these are all volunteers, so to speak, not by choice.
Yeah. No, really, they would volunteer to work for me because they knew that, it was away from the unit and things like that. And I would tell the people downstate that, you send me some more money because I'm doing things cheaper than anybody else in the state can do.
Right. True.
I can stretch a nickel further than anybody in the government.
Yeah.
And then I retired.
And then you retired. And now he's the president of the Friends of Historic Fort Supply, and together we're all stretching nickels. Right?
Exactly.
Well, I got to tell you about the first time I met Bob. It was at a board meeting for Friends of Historic Fort Supply, and I believe I know you had already retired. And so I was kind of surprised to see you in that room for that meeting. And afterwards, we kind of met up outside, and he struck up a conversation. And I said, "The hell are you doing here? I thought you retired." And he said something like, I don't remember exactly, but he said something like, I'm pretty sure Dina Fisher had dragged him back in.
She roped him back in.
Roped him back.
She's good at that. She's a gifted roper, and thank her for that though, because if she didn't do that, I don't know that I'd know Bob, and I like knowing Bob.
Oh, thank you. That and the fact that I'd spent 20 years working on that, and it's kind of like my baby. So
Sure.
I get that. I get that.
here I am doing the same job I was doing before without
pay. Yeah. Well, Robert and I have had that
never the
conversation.
sharpest knife in the drawer, never.
Strange. I'm in the same situation.
Yeah. Pretty much. Although he doesn't have to do all the hard stuff. I do the hard stuff. I give him the fun stuff. I'm like, write me a press release, make me a postcard. But then I make him do hard stuff sometimes. But it's hard in a different sense, I guess. You know, choose your hard kind of thing. But I do appreciate that in both of you doing things because you're in a place in your life where you can, and there are people in this world that are a place in their life where they can do stuff like that and they choose not to. So the fact, it shows a lot to your character that you care about these organizations and the history that they hold for this part of the world, that you continue to make sure that that happens.
Well, and I think the thing about that historic Fort Supply that really strikes me is that there was so much that went on from the very beginning. I mean, that's where Philip Sheridan launched his 1868 to 1869 winter campaign against the Southern Plains tribes. And, you know, and then the people who have set foot on that ground out there, there's George Custer, there's Satanta, Kicking Bird,
Bob, help him if he needs it. You are allowed.
Sorry, I kind of dozed off there.
No, you're fine. But if there's people, you know, that come to mind that he's not saying, add it.
Originally, there was a very influential person in Woodward who got all this started to save Fort Supply. And he was a kind of a Custer fan, so he said, well, that's our big selling point. We actually had a T-shirt with Custer on it to sell the very first couple of years I was there.
He's a war criminal.
Anyway,
that'll get us some fans.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Probably will.
Anyway,
let's make it out to Mr. Rock.
And I knew that, you know, in 25 years of existence, the military occupation, that there were some very interesting people that were there more than probably the whole week that Custer was there. Although, if we you know, diverge a little, the commanding officer's quarters was named by one of the superintendents of the state hospital as the Custer House. He went around, and he was a history buff. He went around and named all the buildings inappropriately. And, you know, people say, I want to see where Custer lived. And I said, well, let's see. He lived in a tent down on the Beaver River because the post really wasn't here at the time. And, well, there's a Custer House here. No, I said, that particular house they called that, it was built, I know for a fact, in 1878. Well, Custer had been laying in his ground in the grave since June of 1876, and then the light bulb comes on.
No, I see.
Although I had an inmate, and we were working on the interior of the building, he came up and said, you need to look at this. We were taking some of that cheap state-bought paneling off the wall, and somebody had written with a big paintbrush, George slept here.
That's great.
Yeah, so, you know, it's just...
But he really didn't, is what you're saying, based on what you know and your research into the site, that building was built after Custer was basically 6 feet under.
Yeah.
And he lived in a tent on the Beaver River. See, that's the amazing thing about history, in my opinion. We make a bunch of stuff up to make it sound cool. But although that's still kind of cool because he lived in a tent, you know, by the river.
Well, you know, in November, the camp was started as Camp of Supply on the Beaver River in, it was November the 18th of 1868. And then they just kept finding reasons to keep the place open until eventually in January of 1879, somebody in Washington said, well, we ought to make that a permanent place. So we'll call it Fort Supply instead of Camp Supply. Or as I tell people, during General Sheridan's tenure as, you know, commander of this particular region, that this was the only fort that I know of, Army post, that was not named after one of his friends, some dead Yankee general. That was it. Well, the post closed, and of course, as the government will do, they spent millions of dollars on this thing over 25 years, and then they decided, well, we'll just let it sit here for a while. And people who had come to this part of the country during the land opening. They were living in a tent or a dugout, and the wife said, "Hey, you can see over there on the horizon, there's some really nice houses that nobody's living in." So they went over there, and it's 1895 to 1908 is what we call a squatter period, where people just came in and lived in the buildings and things.
Which probably, in the roundabout sense, probably kept them in better shape through those times. I mean, a lot of times when they're not inhabited, that they deteriorate faster, so that somebody actually went in instead of them, although it wasn't probably the best way to do it. I'd say it could have been a silver lining benefit in that time.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. If you look back through the old newspapers from those days, there were a lot of people accusing the government's site manager at the time of, taking kickbacks from the squatters and trying to.
Oh, really? See, I don't know any of that.
Handle and
yeah.
People locally were kind of outraged. I think that people were actually out
there
living for free.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, yeah, earn your keep, damn it. But at the same time, I mean, they were keeping, and hopefully, I can't say because somebody can move in somewhere and destroy it, yes. But I feel like in those times, people, they needed that. And when you need something, you take care of it. And it's almost like they moved in and took care of it. So when you look at it, yeah, you're living there for free, but there is, your work and your time that actually went into it to make it inhabitable for you and your family, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So even though they were living out there free, they were doing a service. So you can look at it both ways, in my opinion. That's all I'm saying.
Well, and evidently someone downstate decided that this facility was here and not being used, and so they got the federal government to turn the property over to the state, and it became the state's first state-run mental institution. There was a private institution in Norman, and the patients that they brought up here were brought by train, and then they got local farmers and ranchers to go to Tangier to the train station and pick them up and take them up to the facility. We have pictures of them. Yeah, people were riding in the wagons up there, and they used the old barracks for housing for the patients until they started, accidents, burn buildings down. And so they decided they would start to build a more permanent facility. To them, brick was fireproof, so they started building brick buildings.
So those brick buildings that are there, when we went out there just the other day to get some pictures, us three are working on a project for Fort Supply that has to do with the photographs from there. And so we're trying to get some kind of present day ones to show where that would have been. But those brick buildings that were once inhabited by the mental health facility, the one that you say is haunted, right? Mm-hmm. That then the prison. So those were the original buildings whenever they went from deciding, they're burning stuff down, to we need to build something more permanent.
Mm-hmm. Those were probably built, the whole range of buildings were built from the teens on up. I know there's two buildings that are left from the 1916, 1918. Some of them are built. Some of them were actually built in that particular period, and they've been torn down and replaced by other buildings.
Oh, okay.
But I was just curious. When you look at the architecture, you see things that kind of define maybe what period that they were built in.
Yeah. What was the barn? The mule barn? Is that what it said, Robin?
Mule barn.
Yeah, that said 1916.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that building, the barn or whatever, the stables, that's really neat. They had you could see like it was like a metal holder where a light would have gone, and I pointed that out to him, like, oh, that's cool. But I get what you're saying on the architecture, because that does can guide you to when something was built, which is interesting, because it's interesting to see how everything evolves, history evolves, but you can see it in different aspects of vehicles. There's a lot of times when we're trying to figure out when a picture was taken at the museum, we have somebody bring it in, and we're looking at the vehicles and the architecture to figure out, like, when was this taken? So that's very interesting to
have to look at for all the clues.
Yeah, it's part of the clues. It's interesting to see how that goes. So, but anyhow,
when I took over up there, there were 5 historic structures from the military period. The most impressive, of course, is the guardhouse. It was the only brick building the Army built out there, and it was built 1892. Post closed in 94, so it didn't have a long tenure, but it was a three-course masonry building with bars on the windows. So the hospital thought, hey, this is a good place to store food. We'll keep food away from the inmates.
Okay.
That was the first building we restored and furnished. There's what they call the Teamsters cabin, which was actually civilian employees' quarters. It was built. The quartermaster department of the Army hired a lot of civilians. Most posts there were as many civilians
as there
occupying
were,
the post as soldiers. So.
Yeah, because my older brother, I mean, he's in the military, and I feel like when he talks about people, because he was always like, well, I'm going to retire and come back and work as a civilian, like that's what he always tells me. And he's always talking about people, and he's like, oh, well, they're a civilian, and so I'm like, wow. So I'm curious of the ratio of that, the civilians versus the
I don't
actual.
know that there's a specific ratio. I think it depends on where the facility or where the post is located and the mission.
And the mission. So they just kind of.
But certainly there's always a large civilian
force as well as.
Yeah, the quartermaster department. This included carpenters, blacksmiths, teamsters, drive the wagons, just anything that the soldiers were not. Soldiers were there for one mission, and that was to protect this part of the country.
Right.
Then there was, and that building was probably built, even though the DAR put a plaque on it that said 1867, which of course was wrong. It was probably built in the early 1880s. But the significant part about this building was that it's a picket log. In other words, the logs were cut down and put in a trench with the logs upright. And that roof put on them, and it was easy to put in doors and windows that way. Most of the post was originally was built that way, and this was just one of those things it's actually was once very common on the frontier, and is now very rare to find. I think at one time I had found 5 in Oklahoma.
Oh, wow.
The other one at Fort Supply, unfortunately, sits over in the hospital compound, and it was the ordnance sergeant's quarters. He was an NCO staff member that took care of the weapons and the munitions and things like that, and it's probably the oldest standing structure in northwest Oklahoma, but, nobody can see it. And then we have the commanding officer's quarters. It was built in 78, and then down the street from it is one of the officers' quarters, which is what they call a double set, which is what we would call a duplex. In other words, there might have been an officer and his family live on one side, and maybe 2 or 3 bachelor officers are on the other side. So those are the historic structure. We had built a replica of the original
stockade,
camp supply stockade. That there was a war correspondent, of course, in 1868. He was finding things to do, so he drew a kind of a bird's eye view of the original stockade and encampment, which is kind of strange because there were no trees here at the time, so it wasn't in a balloon, so it might have been a flight of fancy also. But anyway, that's what people recognize camp supply is now. That's their favorite rendition of the place.
Yeah.
And my least favorite.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and that was published in Harper's Bazaar.
Oh, yeah, Harper's, yeah. So everybody in the world got to see it at the time. But when they tore it down for firewood and other things, when they started building the more permanent quadrangle type post with a parade ground in the middle of it.
Because the Army loves a parade.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
You get a bunch of sailors out there, just that we're all over the place.
Yeah, that seems about right. That seems about right.
No comment.
So, I guess, should we ask him about his book yet, Mr. Robin, or you have something else? You know more about this than I do.
If you could kind of bring us up to date on where things stand today, because DOC ran out of there in the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night.
And no, it was basically, oh gosh, the prison's closing tomorrow.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do?
And so there was a lot of concern at the time that the historic site would just vanish. And where all three of us are members of the Friends of Historic Port Supply, and we're doing our damnedest to keep that place going or to get it back to where we can open it up and tour people through those historic buildings.
And people are so interested in it. I mean, that's the thing that gets me. Being at the museum, we have people come in there, I'd say during the tourist season, which is about now, that are just like, what's going on? Why can't we go out there? What's happening? And they have this we had these people that came all the way from New Zealand. Wow. He has gone to every Army camp, historic site in the United States. And this is one of the last ones that he was going to come to. And at that point, we were in a place where now we're in a different place where we maybe could have swung that for somebody that came that far or whatever, as long as we ran it through the powers that be. But at that point, it was like completely shut down. Like we were in no position to do that. And I told him, like, I'm really sorry, but we can't do that for you. But he came all the way just to visit the site, which I told him about everything, what was going on. He got to see, our room in the museum and the rotunda exhibit that we have going on. And I told him, I'm like, if you want to drive by and just take a peek, I was like, don't go in there, but you can take a peek. I was like, if you're that interested, I don't see where that would be a problem. So I'm sure they did just to say they'd been there. But yeah, he was a little disappointed, but understood. And he had no idea that it was where it was at. And he said, well, I saw that it was temporarily closed, but I don't believe everything I see on the Google, which is not a bad thing to say. And he was coming to the States anyhow, so he just had to try his darndest.
Well, and the thing is that, the prison facility and the mental health institution before that, all of that surrounds the historic site.
Right.
And so after DOC snuck away in the middle of the night, there was a lot of concern about what was going to happen.
Right.
And maybe, Bob, you know a lot more about it than I do. You can talk to us a little bit about the trust that's trying to
yeah, because the only thing that's still technically out there is the Northwest Center for Behavioral Health, which at one point was originally Western State Hospital, right?
It's several names.
So it's still state run. So it's still, right, a state facility, and it's the only thing that's still, it was the only thing that was functioning once DOC bailed out.
Right.
Because then the site had to kind of cease operation because of the situation. So anyhow, tell us a little bit more about all of that happening.
In an effort to save things out there was a trust formed among local shareholders in the three counties, Woodward, Harper, and Ellis County. And they've got a board that decides what to do. Now, originally, the military reservation was 50 some odd thousand acres, and that was sold off all but about 3,500 acres for the hospital because in the early days they were self-sufficient. It was just too far from Oklahoma City. And so now that 3,500 acres comes under the auspices of the trust, and they have leased it out to agricultural things.
Right.
They're looking at people that are businesses that would like to come in and utilize some of the structures. That, from the period where DOC was using those buildings. The Oklahoma Historical Society actually has 13 acres, more or less, surveyed out where the historic district is now. And then, like I said, the Friends of Fort Supply are doing fundraising and other efforts. The Historical Society has provided what I would call minimum funding for operations.
Yeah.
And so they also have, at least that's I've been told, is there's going to be money available to restore the structures.
Right.
They're having some problems with all the paperwork involved in that. So
yeah, well,
see what happens.
There's always problems with stuff like that, I feel like, in the government side. sometimes it just ends up being a delay in it happening, and that may be part of it, that it's still going to happen and there's just a delay. It's kind of, we're seeing that in some of our grant funding as well, that there's been, you just never know what's going to pop up, and it just seems like there's so many hands involved in it that we're seeing a kind of okay, what we thought was going to happen, now it's kind of delayed. And so that's kind of where I'm feeling this is going to, is it's a delayed, what we thought was going to happen when it was going to happen is kind of being probably pushed back because of this whole paperwork debacle.
Now, we do have, the Friends Group does have a part-time employee.
We do.
Who is doing grounds maintenance and working on the buildings, and as he can. He works 2 days a week, and he's very good.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that, with that find right there.
Yeah. No, that was really good. And I happen to know the guy, which, and the inside joke of everything, Bob thinks I know everybody.
He knows everyone.
He's
all about them, too.
Yeah. Mikey's got the intel.
I know. He if he wants to know something about somebody, he's coming to me. No. But I just, people are interesting to me, and I just retain the like little minute details about people. I don't know. It's just, I want to blame it on my OCD.
You can blame it on whatever you want to, but it's pretty handy sometimes.
Yeah. You'd be like, what happened with this? Or who, do you know this person? Anyhow.
I haven't found anyone she doesn't know yet.
Well, kind of. You found like one person, I think.
Yeah, but I forgot already because of my age. So.
That's funny. So you'll remember again, and then you'll be like, I wish I remembered them so I could throw you under the bus with that one.
No, I would not do that.
So, Bob, let me put you out on a long limb here.
If you don't saw me off.
How soon do you think we'll be able to open up that place for tours again?
That is a long limb.
Right.
Well,
he's putting you out there.
As the contract states for the Oklahoma Historical Society, we can't open until we have met certain requirements, like, the buildings have to be restored, and we have to have interpretation, and, you have to safe and health, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, again, we come back to my age. I don't know.
Well, let me help Bob out here.
Well, now, wait a minute. Let me say this, though. Our hired hand out there, so to speak, he sees people drive through all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And they stop and they get out and they walk around, so we're really not in a position to stop everybody.
Yeah, but it's just not possible.
The only 2 times the sheriff's department has been out was when somebody said there's a guy out there, and it was him working, and he had to explain to him that he actually did work there.
No, I actually work here.
Yes. So, no, I can't answer your question with any sort of honesty anyway.
Well, and thanks, Mr. Robin, for putting him in a weird spot.
Well,
now. we're just kind of in a place, because based on that, we have an agreement with them, and they've asked us to do certain things, and we're working on it. Really, we've almost marked off all but 2 or 3 of the things they're asking from us. But with this paperwork putting a delay on things, we're working with them. We don't have the funds to do that infrastructure stuff, and it really needs it. So based on that, we're kind of waiting on the state to be able to come in and do the things infrastructurally that need to be done so it is safe for visitors. We're doing the best that we can with what we've gotten, we're given. So it's kind of just like we're partnering with these entities, and we do meet sometimes, go to the trust authority, and happy to be in conjunction with them. But whenever everything was under one entity and it's being split into all these different ones and we're all trying to figure it out, we're still having issues with trying to figure out how we're going to split up electricity, and how there's some water leaks, and so there's some big expenses, and just there's a lot of things that are happening that just aren't going to happen overnight. And so as far as knowing the exact timeline, that is hard to know. And it's hard to sit there and say, well, we have an idea, because we really don't, because we're kind of at the mercy of of everybody else, because we're almost meeting where we need to meet, and we're ready to move forward whenever those entities get to where they're ready to. So it's kind of just whenever they get all that stuff done and we can all get together and move it forward more. But the important part is that it is moving forward, and there are things that are happening, and we just don't know when and where always.
Mikey's our cheerleader.
I am.
And she's really good.
I was one in real life.
I do not doubt that. So we're really just, it's all kind of hinging on paperwork and people getting through and doing what they're supposed to do so we can get on with what we enjoy doing, which is exhibiting and interpreting that history out there, which is so very rich and colorful.
Yeah, and speaking of that, since things are not in full force, Bob's actually been spending some of his time writing books about the history out there and different pieces. He now has 3 of them out and available. Correct, Bob? You want to talk to us a little bit more about that?
Okay. These books came about from projects that I'd worked on when I worked there. One of them actually was part of the my effort to get a master's degree. That was the first book, the Cheyenne Arapaho.
Your effort to get one? I thought you have it.
Oh,
right?
I have.
Okay, I'm like, you got it.
I have one.
Okay.
The Cheyenne Arapaho Transportation Company, which is actually a little known story about an entity that the Indian agent, Darlington, put together for the Cheyenne Arapaho to make some money. They could haul their own supplies if the government provided wagons, and they would provide the horsepower, and they would go up to the railhead in Kansas, pick up their own supplies and bring them back. And some of them got their start. I mean, they were a lot better at freighting supplies than they were at farming. It had been several centuries since the Cheyenne were known as farmers. And the second book was and these are not War and Peace scale books. These are like point of purchase things and something you can read in one setting probably.
Right. No, and that's not a bad thing. I had asked you at one point, I said, why are these so small? And Bob proceeded to tell me, this is everything I know about it. This is literally everything that I know and can put down, right? Is that not what you said?
It could be, I'm just so literate that that's the only thing I could get on paper.
Oh, well.
The second book was about it's sandbag citadels on the plains, which is about the 2 outposts that were built between Fort Dodge and Camp Supply in the 1870s. I might add also that whatever minimal proceeds that we get from the sale of the books goes to the Friends of Fort Supply.
It does, yeah.
And then the third book was actually it's actually on the editor of a memoir. Reminiscence is what they call it, and I hate that word, mainly because I can't spell it most of the time. And,
he forgets the C.
Yeah, the C at the end always.
That's like me and reimbursement.
Yeah.
I have troubles with that.
I found 30 years ago an officer's, what he wrote down about his tenure in western Kansas. And it's very interesting. It's the things that he brings to light that most people in the business, the history business of that era, have probably not heard or seen of. The problem is his first and second installments, I was waiting to find the third one, except there probably wasn't one. But his memoir, a reminiscence of his tenure here, stops right when we built Fort Supply.
Huh.
And he was actually Fort Supply's first post commander. He was a captain.
Well, maybe it was such a big thing that he didn't have the time to sit down and recall it.
I think about that time, he'd already written his Civil War experience.
Yeah.
And then about that time, the Spanish-American War started, and he probably got a little busy.
Well, that's what I was thinking. And that's how I feel whenever I don't write things down. It's because I get so busy.
It's either that or, it's out there someplace and I haven't found it.
There's also that. Yeah.
There's a book in the works about the 1868 Sully expedition into this part of the country, and I'll just be blunt. I think Sully got a bad rap, so I'm trying to make things right.
Okay.
And the bigger
Commendable.
book is the biography of Ben Clark, who was a white scout and interpreter in this part of the world. And there was a reporter asked General Sheridan one time, they were talking about Buffalo Bill Cody and all those people. And he says, well, okay, which one of those people was your best person? And General Sheridan, without a doubt, my best scout was Ben Clark. And everybody goes, who's Ben Clark?
Yeah.
Because he left no real known biographies or legacies.
Right.
So that's a big book that probably, if I ever finish, I mean, I've only been working on it for 30 years. I had a friend in the Park Service. I said, well, you think I ought to write about Clark? And this was like a long time ago. Said, oh, yeah, just start. This is how far back this goes.
Yeah.
He said, get your Big Chief yellow tablet and a number 2 pencil and just start writing. That was it's probably still the extent of my computer knowledge, too.
No, that's
Mr.
true.
Robin Hood,
Yeah, we're always bailing you out. It started with Mr. Robin, but now I bail you out.
Yeah.
So the 3 books that are published out there
are on
available on Amazon.com. And you can go on there and just search for Bob Rea. But let me spell that for you because it's kind of an unusual spelling. It's B-O-B.
Which isn't unusual.
I'm just kidding.
His last name, though.
His last name. It's R-E-A. So just go on and search for Bob Rea, R-E-A. And you can find those books, or you can call the museum at 580-256-6136, and they'll fix you up with one or all of those books.
Yeah, you think Howater's a hard name to get along with.
You're
You'll
right.
try Ray, but
Yeah,
just
for
3
sure.
letters.
Yeah, for sure.
Even teachers have told me, no, you're spelling that wrong.
Yeah, right. And you're like, wait, it's my name. No, I get you. And as Bob comes out with more books, we will add them to our gift shop at the museum as well as being accessible on Amazon. But to add something else before we wrap it up completely is not only is Bob a historian, I don't think we really added to this. He's also a really gifted artist as well.
Oh, right.
We gifted, amazing.
Wow.
He really is. I mean, his pencil and paper is phenomenal, and he does a lot of his own actually all of your own illustrations in the books, right?
You got to get them out there somehow.
Yeah.
Can't sell them at the gallery, so you put them in the book.
But you should. It's a shame that you haven't, because he's really and it's Western. It's very Western art, but
that's comes with my territory.
Well, and that's great. It's not.
When I got out of high school, I went to my job while I was in college was at the Cowboy Hall of Fame in the city. So
okay.
You get surrounded by a lot of art down there.
Yeah, you do.
And some museumology, too.
Yeah.
I was in the first museumology class at Central State College.
Oh, interesting. I didn't
AKA OCU now. So
okay.
Is that right?
Yes.
Something like that. It's been a long time. And then I went to work for the UCO. Yes.
Yeah.
OCU's another school. That's where my mother went to school. Anyway, I digress. Then I went to work for Votech, what we call Career Tech now in Stillwater.
Yep.
As a graphic designer, artist, whatever they call them now.
Yeah.
We didn't have any computers.
Well, that's surprising me because I was like, graphic artist now is computers. What the heck, Bob?
No, we actually had to
had to do
manuals for FFA by drawing things or putting pictures in them by hand.
Yes. Well, and a lot of graphic artists do the same thing now, but they do it in a digital sense. I mean, it
happens a lot quicker.
Yeah, true.
And then I've started using AI to.
That's scary.
To come up with stuff.
Graphics that we have for, I don't know if you saw the one for the Friday update for this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he saw it.
Custer sitting in the
in and out house. Well, Robin and I are artists in that sense, so we have to cheat. It's fine. Well, we can admit it.
If I knew how to do that, I might cheat too, but I don't.
Touche. Anyhow,
everyone has their essential skills.
That's true. And that brings me back, as I feel like on our board, Friends of Historic Fort Supply, there are many of us that have different essential skills that we're all bringing together to make it
work.
Yeah, make it work and make it a place that we can bring visitors at some point. So
And if anybody out there listening is interested in joining the Friends of Historic Fort Supply, the quickest way to do it is to call the museum at 580-256-6136, and they'll get you fixed up with a membership form.
A membership, and even if you just want to, contribute in any way, whether it's money or, hey, put my name down on a list of volunteers, because there's going to be some time, right, Bob? We're going to need to pull some volunteers together to do some stuff here in the somewhat near future. So any way that you want to help and be invested in our cause. I mean, we'd love to have you as a membership no matter what you do, but we'll take extra.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Absolutely. If you have any questions for Bob, you can forward them to either Mikey or me, and we'll send those on to Bob. You can email us at mr.robin@mrrobinshood.com or Mikey@mrrobinshood.com. Also, the Friends of Historic Fort Supply has its own Facebook page that you can find by searching Historic Fort Supply, or go to the Friends website at www.historic-fort-supply.org. But enough about Bob. You can also reach out to Mikey or me via Podophone at 580-827-0472. The call we're not likely to answer because we're becoming international podcast stars. But if you can leave a voicemail. Contact us if you have a question, concern, complaint, compliment, whatever. Just don't be a dick. So we'll wrap this up as we always do and remind you to
stay hungry, stay foolish, and most importantly, stay weird. Bye, everybody.